Good day, duelists. It seems like every Duel Masters YouTube channel is contractually obligated to do top 10 cards of each civilization, so I think it's about time that I did my own list. There's many ways to go about this, but for this list I'll be focusing on competitive Duel Masters specifically, so I won't be rating cards based on cool factor. Rather, what's most important is competitive viability, how well they represent their civilizations, and how much these cards make you want to add said civilization into your deck. I'll be basing these rankings on the 2024 Duel Masters TCG meta, so at least at the time of writing, this should be the most up-to-date top 10 list on YouTube. Let's get right into it with number 10, Duel Spider. That's right, this harmless looking critter may look weak at first glance, only 1000 power and it breaks your own shield? What a ripoff. Well, it turns out in aggressive decks you don't really care about losing shields since they want to defeat their opponents before their own shield count matters. So in an aggressive deck, this is a 2-mana creature that lets you draw a card, basically, which is a lot of value. In the past, I would have put Propeller Mutant in this spot. This is a 2-mana 1000 creature just like Duel Spider, but this one makes your opponent discard a card instead of making you draw a card. It turns out that when playing an aggressive deck, you want to get cards more than you want your opponent to not get cards. Reasoning here is that your opponent will have cards anyway since you're attacking and breaking shields, and in addition you yourself might run out of cards fast since you're summoning many small dudes, so getting cards is very important. Therefore, Duel Spider, very strong card, definitely makes you think about adding Darkness to your aggro list. The only reason why this is only number 10 is because aggressive Darkness decks are not that widespread competitively, though they have seen some success even winning IDC tournaments. Let's get to number 9, Phantasmal Horror Gigazard. Gigazard is a rather new entry in the DM competitive scene, being the latest innovation brought to Hydra Hurricane lists. With strong chimeras to evolve on such as Gigabalza and Gigaslug, in my opinion this card alone pushes Hydra Hurricane from a mediocre deck to a very strong one. While the deck is quite strong, played relatively often and has notable meta impact, this is the only deck so far in which Gigazard has found a home. People have experimented with it in other decks as well, but none of them have proven themselves so far. In addition, Gigazard is not a reason to include Darkness into Hydra Hurricane decks, as these lists would include Darkness anyway because of, well, Hydra Hurricane needing Darkness creatures. For these reasons, despite how strong the card itself is, I cannot rank it any higher than number 9. Number 8 goes to Graveworm Q. Now, this parasite worm is very similar to the previous card, Phantasmal Horror Gigazard, in that they are only viable in one and only one deck type. In this case, that deck is Survivors. Or I should say a family of decks rather, because Survivors can come in many shapes and sizes and civ combinations. But one thing all competitive Survivor variations have in common is this Graveworm Q card. This is what lets the Survivor engine have that incredible late game value and makes Survivor lists the bane of most control decks. Unlike Gigazard though, this card is the main reason why you run Darkness in Survivor lists. I would gladly cut Darkness from Survivor decks if it wasn't for Graveworm. Because of this, I have to rank it higher than Gigazard, and hence I'm putting it at number 8. Know that everything I said about Graveworm you could also say about Gigal, the Hidden Pillager, in that it enables the Wave Striker deck and is the main reason why you add Darkness to it. The reason why Gigal is not on this list and Graveworm is that unlike Survivors, which have seen some competitive representation and success, Wave Strikers in 2024 is seen as mostly just a meme deck. Next up, number 7 goes to Morbid Medicine, which allows you to return 2 creatures from your graveyard to your hand. Morbid Medicine offers great late game value and is an indispensable tool in control decks, especially when facing other control decks. Being able to get a couple Fortress Shells from the graveyard or doing disgusting loops with Faliga will often make the difference between winning or losing. It's usually run as a one-of, but just one copy is enough to completely swing some matchups. Probably the best example is playing something like Fortress Burn versus Ruby deck out. If you don't run Morbid Medicine, or if your Morbid Medicine is in shields, the matchup is actually pretty close. But as soon as Morbid Medicine is in the deck, your win rate skyrockets to like 80% or so. Because of this and because of how splashable it is in a wide variety of decks, this card has to be number 7, even though it's usually run at only just 1 copy per deck. Note that this card is sometimes interchangeable with Corpse Charger, depending on the deck. If you feel like you are lacking ramp, or if you want to loop Belixes or Thrash Crawlers, then Corpse Charger might be the better choice. Number 6 goes to Spinning Terror, the Wretched. We've seen Duel Spider at number 10 as an example of a solid 2-mana darkness creature, but Spinning Terror is just on another level. He gets 2000 power for each tapped creature in the battle zone, and since a creature must be tapped to do battle, for all intents and purposes he has at least 3000 power while in battle. For 2 mana. For reference, this makes Spinning Terror comparable to Quixotic hero Swine Snout, which is in contention for being the single strongest 2-drop in the entire game. Unlike Quixotic, he doesn't prevent your opponent from summoning creatures, but on the flip side, Spinning Terror can never be traded into by cards like Bronze Arm or Sky Sword. The only reason why this beast of a card is only at number 6 is because, like I mentioned for Duel Spider, aggressive darkness based lists aren't exactly top tier or popular, though again they have managed to top IDC tournaments every now and then. And yes, I have no idea where my physical copy of Spinning Terror is, which is why the iPad will have to do here. Number 5, we are getting into really good card territory, and it's Cranium Clamp. Now let me tell you a story. When Duel Masters was first released in Japan, they had a card called Skeleton Vice, which for 4 mana made your opponent discard 2 random cards from their hand. And that card was ridiculous. So when they ported the game over to the West, they went like, okay, we need to nerf this shit. And that gave us this card, Cranium Clamp, which instead of discarding the cards at random, your opponent is allowed to choose which cards he discards. And the card is still bonkers. Not only does this provide an inherent +1 in card advantage, but unlike something like Energy Stream, it does so proactively by disrupting the opponent. Any card game player will know how ridiculous making your opponent discard 2 cards is. While this card does lose some efficiency when the opponent has a large hand, while they have 3 or god forbid exactly 2 cards in hand, playing Cranium Clamp can be game-winningly devastating. It's a card very representative of the Darkness Civilizations, as discard is one of its main mechanics, and having access to discard is one of the main reasons why Control decks play Darkness as well. So, well deserving of the number 5 spot. It's just that there are 4 cards that are better. Quick mention to this card, Cloned Nightmare, which sometimes replaces the Cranium Clamp package. It fills a similar role but costs 1 less mana, discards random cards, and while weak at first gets stronger with every cast. Starting from the 2nd cast onwards, it becomes better than Cranium Clamp. The main problem with it is that you pretty much have to play 4 copies for it to be viable, and it's very often hard to fit that in most decks. For the number 4 slot, we have Locomotive and Gigaba. These 2 cards share the number 4 spot as they have the exact same effect, with the only difference being the race. These little fellas cause your opponent to discard 1 random card from their hand. You may notice a lot of similarities between these guys and the previously mentioned Cranium Clamp. Both cost 4 mana and are a +1 in card advantage and cause your opponent to discard from their hand. But while Clamp theoretically causes more disruption in that it discards 1 more card, Locomotive and Gigaba are just way more versatile. They provide a body on the board that can trade into early threats, the shield trigger ability can come in handy against aggressive decks, and it's just strictly better when the opponent has 1 card in hand. And the fact that you can randomly snipe a key card instead of letting your opponent choose what they discard can be relevant in many scenarios. Ultimately, whether you play these guys or Clamp depends on the nature of your deck and to some extent also on personal preference. Some people play Loco, some play Clamp, some play a mix of both. However, I have been noticing that over time people have started to value the versatility of these 2 guys more, plus they fit in a wider range of decks, so overall I have to rate them just a little bit higher than Cranium Clamp. Now, as to which one of the 2 you should play, Locomotive or Gigaba, well, of course, if you are playing a deck that cares about race synergy, you will pick the appropriate one for said deck. For example, Gigaba in Hydra Hurricane and Locomotive in Hydra's decks. But it can also go deeper than that. One important card to consider here is Petrova, which can buff all creatures of a said race. So all creatures meaning both yours and your opponent's. So if you're expecting to face Petrova lists, which run one of these two, for example, again Hydro Hurricane, it's possible that at some point Petrova will buff Chimeras, so Gigaba is better to put in your deck as it might sometimes benefit from the opponent's Petrova buff. And of course, you can go even one step deeper, like if everyone applies that logic and plays Gigabalza, but you yourself have a Petrova in your deck, then maybe it's better to put in Locomotive so you can buff it without buffing your opponent's Gigabalzas. All in all, which one of the two you play is a debate as old as time, but I think one thing we can all agree on is that Locomotive is just cuter. And at number 3 we have one of my personal favorites, Slash Charger. Slash Charger is just one of those cards that you don't realize how good it is until you do. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. It's a core component of deck out lists, without which the decks would just not exist. Most notably, Ruby deck out has been consistently performing well over the years, even winning an IDC tournament as well as the Finnish Mega Meet 2024 unrestricted tournament. So that alone would make this a top 10 card. But what really pushes it over the top, and I feel like this is something that players have just been discovering more and more lately, is just how surprisingly useful and versatile it is outside of the dedicated deck out lists. Early mana ramp is one of the strongest effects in Duel Masters, especially going from 3 to 5. Many competitive players know that for a lot, and I mean a lot of decks, playing Bronze Arm Tribe on turn 3 is the strongest opener you can have. So maybe it's worth slotting in 1 or 2 Slash Chargers in there just to get another poor man's Bronze Arm, while also decreasing your opponent's card quality? Or maybe sometimes you don't want to use it on your opponent, you want to put one of your own key cards into the graveyard so you can later retrieve it with something like Corpse Charger or Morbid Medicine that we talked about before. Or perhaps the best example of this use case is in Survivor decks, where you can on turn 3 slash away your own Factory Shell, then next turn you're on 5 mana and bam, you can play Graveworm Q to fetch your Factory Shell from the graveyard, which you can then play next turn since you're now on 6 mana. The versatility of this card, together with the strong decks it enables, easily puts it at number 3 on this list. Number 2. Lost Soul. This card is this card but on steroids. No matter how many cards the opponent has in hand, they all go to the toilet when you cast the dreaded Lost Soul. This one card single-handedly wraps control mirrors around itself. The Lost Soul race is an iconic phrase because that's what a lot of control matchups boil down to. Whoever can cast Lost Soul first wins. Mana ramp into turn 5 Lost Soul is among the scariest openers you can face. Just seeing your opponent tapping 7 mana is oftentimes enough to send shivers down a duelist's spine. Lost Soul race aside, this card also single-handedly enables so many comeback scenarios. It doesn't matter how far ahead the opponent is in card advantage, just one Lost Soul top deck can completely turn the tide of battle. Words cannot do this card justice. It is a signature card for the Darkness civilization, and it is definitely a big reason why you would think of adding Darkness into your control deck. And there is only one Darkness card I would place above Lost Soul, and it is this one. Of course, the best card in Duel Masters, Horrid Worm. This 3 mana 2000 p. Nah, I'm just kidding. It's Terror Pit. Of course it's Terror Pit. This card is so simple. Destroy one creature. Came out in base set, and it's as basic of a card as it gets. Despite this, it is the perfect embodiment of what Darkness civilization represents. Destruction, control. The ability to remove any threat at will, coupled with its shield trigger effect, which will often just outright win duels against aggressive decks, makes this card present in almost every single Darkness deck out there. Just the sheer existence of this card makes big beatsticks difficult to run. Just the threat of Terror Pit is oftentimes enough to make people think twice about including big creatures into their decks. Imagine building your deck around controlling the board with Gatling Sky Terror or fitting all 5 civilizations into it to have a big Elixir, only to have them die to a single Terror Pit, potentially for free while breaking shields. I feel like I have to justify though why I put Terror Pit above Lost Soul, despite Lost Soul being generally more impactful when played. Well, it turns out that pretty much every deck that runs Lost Soul also runs Serpent, and usually at more copies, but not necessarily the other way around. Serpent is simply put the single most played Darkness card out there, so in my mind there is no doubt that it is truly worthy of being number 1. And that's it. That's the list from 1 to 10. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you disagree with any of the choices? Did I miss one of your favorite cards? Make sure to let me know. That said, have a good day everyone and take care.